Lions fans. It's really not how I wanted to start today's show. This is John on here with you. It is September 25th of 2017, the day after another screw job. What a lot of the Lions fans would say, it was a 30-26 loss to the hands of the team that was in the Super Bowl last year against the New England Patriots and seemingly choked it away. But the Lions lost to them 30-26. Now, there's a lot of takeaways that you can take away from that game. And in theory, you could always go back to the final play of the game, which was ultimately the dagger that sealed the Lions' fate. And you know how it is for me. I'm not the biggest football guy in the world. I've said that a million times. But when I watched this game, after all the hope that was just seemingly lost, I'm not just talking 0-16, 1-15, 2-14, but it seemed like every single time the Lions even had players, let alone within the previous few years, I would say maybe Javid Best could have been one of the better running backs that we had in the league, if not for the a list of injuries. You had all these other running backs from Wayne State and I don't understand it, but just all these players that never seem to work out. And yet, as the Lions sat here on 2-1, and I know it was one of the most soul-crushing losses in a long time, but I look at it as the Lions sit 2-1, and I thought, damn, I think this team actually has reason to root for it now. And let me be clear about this again. The loss was utterly devastating. But as I sit here and tell you now, I think about guys like the improvement in obviously your franchise quarterback at number 9, Matthew Stafford. I think about just the improvement of Darius Slay, the nice pickups of Jared Davis, Killebrew, some of the stuff that Bob Quinn has done in the draft. I've seen that this Lions team within these 3 games have been able to equate some takeaways. They were able to pick off Matt Ryan 3 times in the game, which is something that hasn't happened, I think, for 3 years for Matt Ryan. And the Lions, ultimately, at the end of the day, even though they didn't win, they hung with the Atlanta Falcons punch for punch. And initially, when I looked at the 3 games, and I saw on the schedule the Arizona Cardinals going into the Meadowlands, a Monday night game on ESPN, Monday Night Football against the New York Giants, and now this game against the Atlanta Falcons, face it, we all try to think of predictive about wins, whether or not when the schedule first comes out. I'm thinking the Lions are going to be 0-3. But instead, they could have been 3-0. But they come out of this right now 2-1. And they're looking pretty good. And what I'm asking you is, at the end of the day, and we'll talk about the loss a little bit too, but at the end of the day, after these 3 games, do you find yourself, I'm not going to say jumping on the bandwagon, because I know everybody in here has never left, these true Lions fans, but for me, in the sense of, yeah, I didn't leave, but I was in the sense of when I went through those seasons, like I said, the 0-16, 1-15, 2-14, all the unbelievable calls that went against the Lions, whether it would be the Calvin Johnson's process of the catch, Calvin Johnson Part 2, against the Cowboys, the Seattle Seahawks, even though I didn't really think that they were in that game. Some Lions fans would talk about that. Just some of the things that had happened throughout the year. But I look at it now in the sense of, now you have a team, not only in the Lions, and the fact that it's even more important that that's the only pro team that you can actually latch on to right now that has any hope, but in the sense of a lot of Lions fans, unless you're 80, 90 years old, you haven't really seen the Lions do much of anything in your lifetime. And now you really have it when you look on it in this Sunday, that you think the Lions can actually do something. You think that they're one of the better teams that you have in the league. And that you actually think that making the playoffs is not just a formality. It's not just something to say, oh, you had a 7-2 start under John Kitna or some of those other teams before that, and that you knew in your heart of hearts that the Lions were not the team that you thought they were, what the record said. You knew that they were going to fall apart. But now I kind of think of it as a team that has a little bit of hope, and being able to see them go punch for punch against the Atlanta Falcons was something that was quite a bit of a surprise to me. What did you guys think? Facebook.com/GBUGunslinger, Twitter @JohnReinott. I want to address a few things, because obviously we can talk about the loss, and obviously you can talk about what you thought about what the refs did and what Jim Caldwell may or may not have done or what the Lions should have done going forward. But I thought in the absolute aftermath of the game, and yet it's easy to say because it's the absolute, just the ending of the game, and you can armchair quarterback this thing. But Jim Caldwell had a real opportunity last night, and I think that Mike Valenti did a good job with this in this 2-6 for 97-1 when he talked about it too. But we all talk about it around here. Whether or not you think that Jim Caldwell is a good manager, whether or not you view him in the same vein as Brad Ausmus of the Detroit Tigers, who is not going to be here at the end of the year, Jim Caldwell had an opportunity to at least use a platform to change things. Maybe not ultimately change things for the better, but at least try to drive a little sentiment, a little stake into the NFL, just to try to see and gauge how the other fans are feeling at this time of day. And I would be amiss if I didn't address the fact that I always talk about that the Lions could play better and they could do some other things. And I've seen some of the comments on the wall, especially after that Dallas game from the year prior to that, and people were saying you have to talk about it because the refs are going to continue to do this BS. I've seen a few of those comments on my wall, and I'd be remiss to not talk about it again. But what I would say now is I can essentially, and even though I hadn't really, I never really left the Lions, but you kind of hope for bad things to happen at the point when they had such bad season because you want to change. And that's kind of what I ended up feeling about it. But for Jim Caldwell to just go out there, and credit again to, I get it, to have his players ready, to have them be professional, to, take things one game at a time, that old cliche, and get his guys ready to play and battle with the guys in the trenches. I get that. The players respect him, and for that, that's something good for Jim Caldwell. Again, there's some of the other things, as we don't plan on that we couldn't possibly understand, but yet it seems like the players and Jim Caldwell, they're all on the same page. But what I thought Caldwell might have missed in that opportunity was to at least to go out and address how fans might be feeling and saying, even though ultimately agree that, yes, the refs, they probably made the right call on that decision. They did what was by the rule book, and the Lions ultimately end up losing the game. But it would have been nice to hear the coach, to hear someone come out there and say, because it was never the Fords at the time. It was never going to be Martha Ford. It certainly wasn't going to be Matt Millen or Martin Mayhew. But now things would be a little bit different here with Bob Quinn. Maybe not so much with Jim Caldwell, but it would have been nice to hear them come out and say, this kind of pisses me off. This stuff has been going on for the last 3 years. We're trying to get this to change. We're trying to get the perception to change. We ultimately don't agree with the decision, and we just don't like where it was headed. And we think this team is just always getting dogged by the referees or things like that. Whether or not they wholeheartedly agree with the statement, if it was just in fact the sentiment or just a little bit, just a reminder of some of the stuff that's going on with the Lions, that would have been nice to actually hear from somebody in the organization. Whether or not it's to me, I couldn't care less about that, whether or not they do that or not. But I think for a lot of the fans and a lot of you guys out there, I think that's something that we would need to hear. And I certainly get it from that perspective. And it would have been nice for the Lions to go out there, somebody to go out there and say it. Yeah, Matthew Stafford could be politically correct and say, the pass could have been a little bit higher, could have had a little bit more execution there for the touchdown, so Golden Tate would be able to get into the end zone. But in the other sense of it, when I sit here and tell you, which I agree, I'm not just saying this to try to piss people off, that the Lions had 2 opportunities before that with a full series to go 3 and out with the score still being the way that it was at 30-26. They weren't able to get it in on the final drive. And yes, Jim Caldwell is one of those guys that always has the timeouts in his back pocket. And it's easy to say now that he went out there and maybe made a mistake, maybe save a timeout before that 2-minute warning to make sure the Lions have an opportunity to march down the field. But yet ultimately with like 1:40 left and not having any timeouts, you think about Tom Brady, you think about Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, Ben Roethlisberger, Matt Stafford. There probably isn't a lot of other guys that you would want in that 2-minute drill to go out there and march down the field and give yourself a chance to win. And this was Matt Stafford's third opportunity to do so. And finally got down to the goal line thanks to a just awful penalty by Trufant, with the hands all over the Lions receiver that was out of bounds to get them at the 1st and goal. You can talk about all day whether or not you think the Lions should have ran in one of those plays, but not having any timeouts probably puts you in the point where you're not going to be able to get all 4 plays off. And again, we talk about it from 2 to 6, and I agree with it at this point too, that I have to mention, if you wanted to run that play or you didn't like that play call, it's easy to talk about after the fact. Maybe if you wanted to, we could split the difference and say that you'd run it on 4th and goal. But it was the 2 times before that the Lions could have had an opportunity to win the game that they weren't able to go down and march down the field. Yes, it ultimately doesn't feel like the right decision. Yes, it was the right call. But the Lions fans, and I get it, and everybody out there, we all don't have to feel the same way about it. I mean, everybody understands what you feel and where we're coming from at this point, because it certainly feels like one of those screw jobs. I got to address a couple other things too. Facebook.com/GBUgunslinger, Twitter @JohnReinott. Leave comments and thoughts as always. Eric Ebron, within those last 2 opportunities for the Lions to actually score, Eric Ebron, one of the top picks in the NFL draft at tight end, top 10 pick. Ultimately, like Valeni had said, and like a lot of us had ended up thinking about, he needs to end up panning out so the Lions can do what they need to do. But unfortunately, at this point, I think we're his 3rd year in the league now, certainly seems like Eric Ebron's not that guy. I know that's not the most illuminating thought that's ever gone across my head, but with the visual discomfort that you can see on Matthew Stafford's face, to say the least, it certainly felt like he was not too happy with Eric Ebron and that Ebron should have caught some of those passes. It certainly feels to me that when Dan Leach goes on and talks about Eric Ebron and calls him Ebron Megatron, half of that's some garbage. And Eric Ebron played like some hot garbage out in that 90-degree Michigan sun. It did not seem too good for Eric Ebron. He played 1 good half this year against the New York Football Giants in the Meadowlands. But that doesn't, acquiesce all the problems that he's had throughout his career, saying he's going to make an all-star team. He's going to do all that. He's going to lead the Lions to the playoffs. He's going to lead them to something greater. You got to make some damn catches first before you can talk about any of the things that you're going to try to do for this team, because he's not pulling his weight. And when I see that there are some other issues where, you have Greg Robinson getting all the holding penalties and all that, nothing's perfect. But when Eric Ebron drops a pass that Matthew Stafford hit him 3 times within those 3 possessions, where the 2 of them were 3 and out, where he should have caught the ball, hit him right in the hands, and hit him right on the numbers, I don't know what else Ebron has to do, and I don't know what else Matthew Stafford has to do. Does he have to get some glue and keep his hand shut so he can hold on to the football? What does he have to do in order to catch it? And I'm not going to sit here and try to bag on Ebron the entire time, because the Lions had the opportunity to win the game. And yes, the stuff that happened with the refs was not the most favorable thing in the world, but the Lions had some opportunities, and he just didn't come through. And it certainly seems like the Lions will have to take one of these draft picks probably again going into next year and addressing the tight end and addressing something else, because you had Brandon Pettigrew, that didn't work out. Now you have Eric Ebron, and that certainly seems like it's not going to work out. And I don't know what else the Lions can do at that point, but they're going to have to try to figure out somebody else, something else, just any chance. You could bring back Joseph Fourier. We wouldn't even care here. Catch the ball. Give the Lions a chance to do something. Now, with Stafford, you can say that, and I know a lot of people say, well, he wasn't as sharp as he needed to be. He could have had more touchdown passes. He could have played a little bit better. I get that there's some people out there that are going to do that. Bottom line is Stafford threw for almost 200 yards. He had a touchdown. He didn't have any interceptions. The Lions didn't have any turnovers. The Lions forced 4 takeaways. They played about as good as they could possibly play. And again, we all mention it, and I mention it every week, about the beat-up offensive line, the defensive front, We get it. Everybody's hurt. I don't need to rehash that all the time for all these NFL players. Everybody, it's always a game of attrition. It's war of attrition. But the Lions are able to do some things like forcing takeaways that they haven't been able to do all of last year, especially within these 3 games. They're being smart with the football. And yes, I know the running game did not work to absolute perfection. At points, it didn't even work at all with Abdullah and Riddick, Washington, and all of those guys. But you know what, damn it? I am still happy in the fact that the Lions continue to try to run the football, because that's what you need to do. You can't have Matthew Stafford going out there and throwing 50 times a game. I like it when I see Matthew Stafford move out of the pocket and be able to get to the sideline and get out of bounds. But what I wouldn't like is the fact that when that happens sometimes where he's not going to be able to do that, the dude's going to take some hits, and it's not going to be good, because obviously we all know whether or not I'd bagged on Stafford before, but within these last 2 years, I cannot do it. I don't care about how much money he makes and all that. This dude is a difference maker. He's one of the best quarterbacks that we have in the league right now at the moment, and he's playing like it. He's playing like his team should be 3-0, and he's playing like he's deserved that money. He's been an absolute leader of this team. He's been able to scramble out of the pocket, read defenses, make throws when he needs to make them. He got the Lions in a chance to ultimately win the football game. And whether or not that play is just a little bit short, whether or not the throw could have been a little bit better as a Matthew Stafford addressed or Golden Tate, whether or not definitively, whether you thought he was in, some of you guys did, some of you guys didn't. And one of those things, I would ultimately say, whether he did or didn't, that this team has played a hell of a lot better. And in my estimation, I think it's a team now, especially within these 3 games, it's a team that you can finally, if you hadn't jumped on the bandwagon, I think all these guys that you mentioned outside of Detroit, there's some bandwagon fans, maybe, possibly. I don't think at all, because if you're not in Detroit, you would never be a Lions fan to begin with, because why would you? There's a lot of other teams. But for the people that have never left, which is the majority of everyone that's here in Detroit, you finally have a team to be able to get behind. And when you immediately talk about the Lions, you don't get the Nelson ha-ha laugh. You actually have a legitimate football team in this town. And it's going to be more important than ever, especially with the Tigers being down, the Red Wings being down, and the Pistons being down, and whether or not you want to include your college football teams or college basketball. But the Lions are going to be the most important team in this town for the rest of the season and for the foreseeable future, because the NFL, the No Fun League, makes money a lot. And it's a huge presence in Detroit, across everywhere, obviously. That can't be understated. But the Lions fans that bleed the Honolulu blue, or whatever you want to change it to now, you finally have something to root for. And in that essence, and in that respect, you should feel pretty good about that. I know it was a gut-wrenching loss, but at the end of the day, I choose to think about some of the better things that end up happening throughout these 3 games and thinking that this team is for real. Now, a couple other things I want to mention before we end up breaking about the Lions. Dean Blandino, whether you talk about the head of operations, calls, and all of that, I can't forget 2 years ago that Dean Blandino was on the party bus, the Cowboys party bus, with Jerry Jones doing shots. Now, essentially, to a lot of the Lions fans and everyone else out there, even though the Cowboys, after that week, they got screwed with Des Bryant and the same process of it, and the referees have just been terrible. But in the respect of Saturday's game against the Falcons, you had Dean Blandino ultimately deciding the call that went the Falcons' way from 30 to 26. Now, for a lot of Lions fans, that doesn't rub them the right way, considering what had gone on a couple of years ago against the Cowboys. I don't blame you. Is there some inherent bias? There's always going to be some inherent bias everywhere, not just in sports. It's in whatever you do, whether it's your profession, whether it's what you believe in, whether it's just anything. We don't need to rehash all of that. But there is some inherent bias there. But if the Lions, and I've said this many, many times, they played a good game. They could have won that game last night. And ultimately, when I said, and I'll still stick behind it, even though the Lions had played a better game before, you'd say they should have just played better, and that was the only excuse. Yes, they had a couple chances before that with the 3-and-outs, with the score remaining the same. That could have changed some things. But the Lions ultimately played good enough to win that game. And in the eyes of, Dean Blandino, and whether or not it was called a touchdown on the field, and whether or not you guys agree with it should have been a touchdown or it shouldn't have been in the first place, was there enough, indisputable evidence to change that? Some of you guys have watched it a million times. You've said there wasn't. Some of you have said watched it a million times and said there was. Remains to be seen. But with Dean Blandino on there, it's not a good look considering what happened with the Lions a couple of years ago. So in essence, what I leave you with is the Lions are 2-1. They're tied with Green Bay and Minnesota. Chicago is sitting at 1-2. Next week, the Lions are going to play Minnesota in Minnesota. And quite honestly, after watching these 3 games and thinking about the schedule and thinking against the Cardinals, against the Giants, and against the Falcons that the Lions could have possibly been 0-3, I'll be on the record, and I'll say I've been on the record again even before the season started. I picked the Lions to win 5 games this year. I didn't think that they were going to be very good. After watching these 3 games, the Lions will be a playoff team. And they may very well, I will say at this point, 7:15 p.m., 9:25:17, I think the Lions are going to win a playoff game this year. I don't have any proof to back that up, but from what I've seen from these 3 games, I feel that the Lions have actually turned a corner. Yes, there was some penalties and things that could be taken care of. Yes, there could have been better execution, whether it could have been the pass from Stafford, the other 3 and outs, or the Eric Ebron drops. But the Lions are certainly going places because the defense has done something I haven't seen them done in years. And I actually believe in number 9. I believe in everything that this team is trying to do. I believe in Bob Quinn. I think this team has a future, and I think that it could be bright. Now, everything could change from week to week to week. We get it. This is the NFL. There was some crazy stuff that was going on with the Chicago Bears, the New Orleans Saints destroying the Carolina Panthers, the Washington Redskins beating the Oakland Raiders. But it's a week to week to week thing. But at the end of it, by the time this season ends, I think the Lions will be sitting in the playoffs again. I think they have a chance to win this division. I don't know if they're going to win the division. I'm going to say wild card at this point. But I think that they can win a playoff game because I'm still hesitant of what's going to happen against Green Bay. Now, if Green Bay doesn't do a better job of protecting Aaron Rodgers, things could change because I don't know if he's going to be able to last all season. But we'll see what happens now as the Lions start to get into these divisional tasks. But here and now, at this moment, I believe the Lions will be able to do something special. Facebook.com/TBUGunslinger, Twitter @JohnReinott. What did you think of that Lions game yesterday? Have you digested all of that? What were your thoughts? Did you think that the Lions got screwed? Did you ultimately think that the Lions made the right decision? What did you think of the efforts of that game? And what did you think of the Lions going forward this season? Do you believe in them now, or do you still think they have a lot of work to do? This is John Ott signing off for Sports Day in the D of the September 25th, 2017 show. As always, guys, thanks for sticking around. And as we go forward throughout the next couple of weeks, Michigan is going to be off. They looked okay, especially in the second half. They dominated. But Michigan State did not look so good against Notre Dame. And we can leave it at that. Michigan will be off next week. Michigan State will be put to task again. And the Lions will be playing against Minnesota. As far as NBA 2K18 and NHL 18, been playing them a little bit, working on the badges for 2K18, and got a playoff run tonight for NHL 18, especially after everything gets ready for all my teammates after the Cowboys game and them getting off of work and all that. I'm going to need some more time before I can accurately review the 2 games, but in essence right now I can tell you everything is going pretty smoothly, but I'll have some more in-depth stuff for you in the future. But next week we'll get back into the Lions again in Minnesota and some of the other things that are on my mind. Facebook.com/TBUGunslinger, Twitter @JohnReinott. This is John Ott signing off for the September 25th show of 2017. Gonna go check out the Red Wings at the LCA on TV and see how they do against the Pittsburgh Penguins. Appreciate it, guys. Have a good one.